6:38, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. This is the headline. Sober people are being arrested for drunk driving, and violence in Nashville continues to be an issue as well. There's a lot going on. I want to speak with our top cop, Cathy Hinners. Cathy, it's been a minute. Always great to have you on the radio program. You remain one of my all-time favorite guests, going way back to when I was on in middays. I think you were actually one of my first guests that I ever had on the program, and so I'm glad to have you back. So I want to talk about this, and the reason why this really strikes a personal tone with me, the folks being arrested for drunk driving when they're actually sober, is that it happened to a friend of mine, and I'm not going to say her name, but she was going through a divorce, and she was trying to find a job, and she got into a car accident. And the officer on scene charged her for drunk driving, even though eventually her blood work came back and she was sober as anything. But he used as justification, I guess, this, roadside sobriety test. And he decided that she was drunk. And so she ultimately, as she's going through this divorce and a custody battle, didn't look good there. And she wasn't able to find, she was about to get a job in a position where she would be driving, and that job fell through, of course, with the accusation that she'd been drunk driving. And so Channel 4 has done now this story, and that is the headline, that you've got all of these folks that are being charged for drunk driving when they're sober. This is part of what they wrote, Channel 4. From Clarksville to Murfreesboro, from Franklin to Goodlettsville, they say, we found sober drivers charged with DUI, and because of a backlog in alcohol and toxicology tests at the TBI, these innocent people are forced to wait months for proof of their innocence. In the months that followed their DUI arrests, their lives crumbled. Now, I'm here to tell you, Cathy, I can't do it, but if I open up the phone lines right now, they would go off the charts with people that this has happened to. You saw this headline like I did. I mean, what in the world is going on? Is this a failure in policy? Is this a failure in equipment, or is this just a problem within the department?
I think it's a little bit of everything, but I wanted to cover just some pros and cons, for both sides.
Yep.
So, more on the pro police side, there has to be a reason for them to stop the vehicle. What led to the probable cause for them pulling them over? What did the driver do? Did they swerve? Did they go over the line? Did they not have, the headlights on during the dark? Did they run a stop sign or stop for a stop sign that's not there? So, that starts with the probable cause. Then the officers have been asked to perform, many of them, in this case, have been asked to perform the blood alcohol content test rather than the field sobriety test. A lot of people cannot do the field sobriety test because they might have a physical injury, they might have a deformity. There's a lot of reasons why people can't do those tests. And so a lot of times they'll fail because they're not focused enough on the test itself, but rather they're stressed, extremely stressed. So that's something.
Well, and I will note, if I may, Cathy, I will also note that in a couple of the cases, first of all, my personal case where I know somebody, she flipped her car. She was in an accident. She'd flipped her car, and they're asking her to stand on one leg and tell the alphabet backwards. I mean, I'm sober, and I can't say the alphabet backwards.
Right. Most of us can't, and so those standardized field tests, there's 3 different ones. There's the horizontal gaze, the one leg stand, and then a walk and turn. Each one of those is very hard, even sober, to pass. And so, that's something specific to that case that's going to be a problem. Yeah. And a lot of these officers are going to have problems. But if they refused to give someone the BAC test, it's probably because they aren't certified. They're trained to do the field sobriety test, but they have to be certified to do the blood alcohol content test. There's a big difference. The BAC certification is a lot more intense. They usually have to, be able to calibrate the equipment and know how to do that. It's usually a state standard. Mm-hmm. So that may have been a reason why if they're refusing the BAC test. There's also a huge liability issue. Once they've stopped you for suspicious driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they're going to arrest you, because if they were to let you go and you got into an accident and worse killed someone, the liability is going to come back on that officer. So they're going to continue the paperwork, and they're also going to bring you in, and you will be arrested. That's the unfortunate part, because the tests are taking months, and like you said, people's lives are being destroyed. People's jobs are being lost, families are being destroyed. So there's a lot of pressure here on police right now to be doing it right. And I'll say there's a lot of officers that just do things willy-nilly. They're not following really what they should be following, for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. Cathy, everybody knows I have been a huge supporter of the police for years. And so to me, if this is an issue, then I want it to get fixed, because I'm not a blind supporter. If there's things that are going on that need to be fixed, I don't want all cops to be tarnished by the actions of a few, or by faulty equipment or faulty policy. What about a breathalyzer? I mean, I understand the blood test, but what about a breathalyzer? Are those real accurate?
They can be, but they have to be calibrated. Those are the machines, that's the equipment that would be back in their precinct. And that's when the suspect is brought back to the precinct, they will be asked to do that. And there's a big time frame. I mean, the subjects have to be watched for a certain period of time before they can conduct the test. They have to make sure they don't have anything in their mouth, no gum, no lifesavers, anything like that. So there's a lot to it. But that equipment has to be calibrated, whether it's a state TBI guy that comes in on a monthly basis or somebody that's trained within the agency. So some of the cons, though, what I'm learning, and I'm the same way with police. I mean, having been in law enforcement for over 20 years, I am pro-police, but I also can recognize when there's issues, and this is an issue. But I'm learning from a source that now police are receiving training on what's called driving while drowsy. And I think that's very dangerous, because they're equating being drowsy as bad as being drunk or under the influence of drugs, which, you can agree with or not agree with, but there's no,
I don't agree. I don't agree with that. I mean, I understand that, you maybe the impact is still the same. You're drowsy, so you're falling asleep, but people know getting behind the wheel of a car drunk that is something that can, obviously, as everyone knows, lead to some very fatal consequences. Getting behind the wheel of a car and you suddenly become drowsy, but you don't always really know it. I mean, I've done that. We all have experienced that. Top cop Cathy Hinners is joining us on Super Talk 99.7. I should have mentioned in the open, Cathy, of course, new people are coming in all the time, but you spent I forgot to introduce you properly. I figure everybody knows, but Cathy Hinners spent over 20 years in law enforcement in the state of New York. Moved here to Tennessee, of course, way back when, and you've been on with me and others for many, many years. So let me ask you, just as we wrap up this part in 30 seconds or less, number one, let's obviously admit that 600 people arrested for drunk driving when they were sober. That is a minuscule amount of people when you look at the amount of people that law enforcement deal with on an annual basis. So that's number one. We all recognize that this is a very small amount, but tell that to the people whose lives are ruined, frankly, until their names are cleared. But what's the answer to this? Like, again, in 30 seconds or less, I have another story I want to get to, but how do we fix this problem?
The training for the police officers has to be better. And more up to date, and there has to be more responsibility for and accountability for these people that are being arrested, whether it's a fact that the paperwork was not done correctly, or the test was not performed correctly, or they weren't certified correctly. So it does come back to policy issue. And so, or officer, whether it's a lax officer, not paying attention to what he's doing. But yeah, and just so you know, I believe it's WSMV did ask the TBI to give them a list of the agencies that have conducted these arrests. And so hopefully the TBI will release that information so people can look a little bit more into who's doing this and what the problem is within that agency.
All right. In other news, I saw a story the other day. It was when I was on vacation, But there's one of these community meetings, and these community meetings drive me nuts. But in a city of millions, you have a community meeting where it looked like maybe 100 people show up, a very low turnout. It's in a high school gym, but this community meeting was all about violence in the city of Nashville. You've got these air quote community leaders that are out there trying to tell folks, we've got to handle the violence and all of these other things. And they start talking about these violence interrupters, which are people in organizations like Gideon's Army that go out into the community and try to engage with these guys who are prone to violence or at risk, theoretically, of being engaged in violence. And so one of the things that I will say, and I've been covering this a long time, is they always seem to have these meetings with the preachers and the community leaders and all this other stuff. Nobody ever talks about a lack of fathers in the home. That's number one. And number two, they always try to bring it back, of course, to gun violence and gun control. And I think that until you handle the father issue and you handle the gang problem in our town, then all the rest of this is just talk.
Absolutely. And it's encouraging that they're doing it. But when you have, and we've talked about Gideon's Army before, they are not the people to be going out into the community to do this.
No.
But it's really important that they separate the issues, and they don't. There's the elephant in the room, and that is the fatherless. In this communities, the fatherless amount of children is astounding. I think I've read where 516,000 children in the state of Tennessee live in a single parent home. So there is a problem. You do need a father in the home for stability and other reasons. But what's interesting is a lot of these meetings are being hijacked by activists. Now, you can be an advocate, but the activists are the one bringing up gun control. Gun control is ridiculous. It's never going to happen. If you look at the word backwards, control gun, who controls guns? It's the criminals. And so, when you start looking at statistics, and according to a statistic on the Metro Police site, as of October 8th, 702 guns have been stolen from vehicles. The number now is over 965. So who's stealing those guns but criminals? So we have a crime problem. Let's work on crime control and violence control rather than something like gun control. That's never going to happen. But, some of the leaders, they are talking about bringing back God into, children's lives, which is another thing that is needed, that's been removed from everywhere.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of things that, they're like elephants in the room. If they're offensive to people, we're not going to talk about it. And they're never going to be able to solve violence until you get those two things straight. So, it's really sad, though, when you look at the violence that's occurring within these communities. And there are blips on the news. You'll have several people shot across the state or across the country. We're talking hundreds of people killed every day. Yep. And yet then it turns to gun control. The sad part is when a police officer shoots someone, it isn't about gun control. It's about the actual police officer. Has he disciplined everything? It's just, and then there's riots, and we don't see that when there's just massive amounts of killings within communities. And so priorities are kind of messed up, but the expectations of, the gun control and just being able to fix it by getting together is, not much. It's kind of like zero if they don't have the right tools to go into these meetings.
Well,
and then universal background checks are only as effective as the person's, the truth being told on these applications.
Well, and the thing is, for me, Cathy, as we wrap this up, for me, I think we do need more police. We do need tough on crime laws and policies. If there are misdemeanor crimes out there, they need to be charged and they need to face consequences even for misdemeanors, because when, in my opinion, they commit misdemeanors, they get caught. And the longer that they are allowed to get away with this stuff, the more they escalate in their crimes. And we see that time and time and time again. I'm not saying that we need to be draconian, but there does need to be some consequences when laws are broken. Real quickly, Cathy, give me your website, give folks your website, and if you're on Twitter, where can people follow you on Twitter?
I am on X. I am at dailyrollcall.com. My website is dailyrollcall.com. and I can be reached on Facebook just under Cathy Hinners. And I appreciate, coming back on. We've got a lot to talk about, in the future here. There's a lot of things happening in the city of Nashville as well as the state of Tennessee. Just a teaser, I guess we've got some immigration problems.
Oh, we sure do.
We'll be looking at some lawsuits that are being put out there by our attorney general in this state. And so there's some interesting things that I think we're going to be able to work on. Maybe in the future we'll be talking about.